Hello everybody, welcome to my studio. My name is Leo. In the today's video we will compare the NUX Solid Studio against the Mooer Radar. Both units are power amp and cabinet simulator in which you can also load your own IRs. Let's start with a brief description of the input, output and of the knobs. The Mooer Radar is very simple. It has an input, an output and an headphone output. It has a little LCD screen with which you can customize the parameters of the unit and a switchable rotary knob with which you can change the parameters. In the LCD screen you see the preset you are using, an image of the IR, the name of the IR, in my case Lone Star, and then the three sections you can control with the rotary knob: the power amp section, the cab section and the EQ section. Then moving the knob you change the preset. While pressing quickly once the knob you can control the master volume. Pressing once more you exit. Pressing for a few seconds you access the control panels divided into three sections I was mentioning previously, and then pressing for more time you basically bypass the pedal. In the power amp section you can switch on and off the power amp. You can change the valve type of the power amp, input volume, presence and output volume. In the cab section you have the name of the IR, the mic type, the mic volume, the distance of the mic from the cab and the position of the mic. And then finally you can control even the EQ. The EQ could be graphic or parametric. You can have a low pass filter, an high pass filter, and then you can change 4 specific frequencies that are 120, 360, 800, 1.5 kHz and 6 kHz. On the other hand, the NUX Solid Studio has more input, outputs and knob and switch. It has an input, a switch with which you can select plus 4 dB or minus 10 dB, another switch with which you can select if it has a line output or speaker output. Then you have a true bypass for connecting the unit directly to a speaker, and another output that can be used for connecting your headphone or for going directly to a mixing console. It also has a DI output with an XLR cable. You can connect the unit to a mixer. It has two switches with which you can switch on and off the cab simulation and switch on and off the power amp simulation. As regards the knobs and controls, you have an A position knob with which you can select the cabinet, another A position knob with which you can select the mic. Then you can select the power amp valves between 3 options and the position of the mic with 3 different options: center, middle or edge. Then you have 3 knobs with which you can control the master volume of the unit, the level of the drive and the presence of the power amp section. Both unit has an USB input in order to deeply change the parameter or to load your own IR, as I did for the song at the beginning of the video, where I load the exact same IR in both units. Now let's have a look at the comparison chart of the two units. We will compare the two units against the following data: functions, power valves that you can simulate, the controls, the I/O, the sampling frequency supported, the AD resolution supported, the frequency response, the noise level, power needs of the two units, the max I/O level, the latency, the max IR length in the case you want to load your own IRs, the dimension and weight of the two units, and last but not least the price of each of them. Now let's summarize the 4 initial data. Functions: with the radar you have the power amp simulation, the cab simulation, the mix simulation, the EQ, and you can store 36 presets that you can browse with the rotary knob. While in the NUX Solid Studio you can have the power amp simulation, the cab simulation, the mix simulation, and you can load 8 presets that you can browse with the knob associated with the cab. So basically in the Solid Studio you don't have an EQ section and you have less presets. The radar accepts also 88.2 kHz IR, while the Solid Studio does not accept 88.2 kHz IR, but it is limited to 44.1 kHz IRs. This is the message that the Solid Studio application show me when I try to load an IR bigger than 44.1 kHz. The power valves that you can simulate with the radar are the EL34, EL84, 6L6, 6V6, while basically with the NUX Solid Studio you don't have the 6L6. The controls in the radar, you have one 3-way switchable rotary knob, while the NUX has a much more rich section of controllers: cab knob, mic position, valves, master, drive, presence, and you can switch on and off the amp and the cabinet simulation. As regards the input and output, I have already described them in the previous section of the video. Basically the radar is very minimal. You have input, output and the headphone jack, while in the Solid Studio you have the input, the output, headphone output, a DI output and the speaker output. Now let's have a look together at the more technical data, starting from the sampling frequency. In the radar the sampling frequencies is limited to 44.1 kHz, while the Solid Studio reach 88.2 kHz, while the AD conversion resolution is 24-bit for the radar and 32-bit for the Solid Studio. So, according to this technical data, the Solid Studio should have a much better conversion. The frequency response is equal for both units, the noise level is equal, while as regards the power they need, here we have a difference because the radar needs 300 mA at 12 volt, while the NUX Solid Studio needs less power, 230 mA and 9 volt. The max I/O level is not specified in the radar, while with the specific switch in the NUX you can switch between plus 8 dB or minus 20 dB. The latency is less than 2 milliseconds for the radar and 0.7 milliseconds for the NUX. The max IR length is 23 milliseconds, while it is equal to 46 milliseconds for the Solid Studio. In the Solid Studio you can load longer IR that basically contain also the sound of the room that is going to be cut off in the radar. The dimension, the radar is a lot smaller and lighter than the NUX, and the price, the radar is cheaper because it costs $150 more or less, while the Solid Studio costs $200. Now let's focus on the strength and weakness of each of the two units. As regards the functions, the radar in my opinion is better because you have the EQ that in the NUX is not present and more presets. Even for the power valve simulation, the radar is better because it has one more valve type that you can choose. As regards controls, in my opinion, it depends of what you want, because basically with both units you can have all the controls with the radar. Even if it has less knob and buttons, you can access all of the functions that you can access with the Solid Studio, but it is a little bit less handy because you do not have each parameter at your disposal with a specific knob, but you have to dig into the menu. As regards the I/O, in my opinion the Solid Studio is better because you have more input and output. As regards the sampling frequency and the AD resolution, the Solid Studio is better. Frequency response and noise level is equal, so as regards the current and the power needs of the two units, in my opinion the Solid Studio is better because it needs less power and it has a 9 volt input against a 12 of the radar that is less common. The latency is better in the Solid Studio. Max IR length, the NUX is better. It allows you to upload in the unit longer IRs. For the dimension there is no story because the radar is way better of the Solid Studio because it is thinner and lighter, and for the price the radar is once more better because it costs less money, more or less €50 or $50 less than the Solid Studio. So finally, if we just base our comparison on the technical data, the Solid Studio is a little bit better because it has actually 6 plus against 5 plus of the radar, and vice versa. Just have one more plus than the radar, and for this reason it is a little bit better, just basing our comparison on technical data. Now let's try detailed comparison of the sound of these two units. I'm using a Sir Classic Antique S, while in the song at the beginning of the video I was using a Les Paul. The guitar is then going to a Victory V4 all-valve preamplifier that then is going into a LP split, which is splitting the signal in two parts. The first one is going to the radar, the other one is going to the NUX Solid Studio. So then I'm recording both of them at the same time in my digital audio workstation. I'm using the same IR in both units, which is a simulation of a Mesa Boogie Lone Star Black Shadow cabinet. And then I have connected both units to my MacBook, where there is their own apps loaded, so that I can change the parameters in the app for both units at the same time. Let's try with some clean sound, starting from the radar. This is the Solid Studio. Radar again. Solid Studio. Go back to the radar with some overdriven sound. Solid Studio. Radar. Solid Studio. So basically, to me, they sound different. The Solid Studio has cleaner high end, while in the radar the mid frequencies are more pronounced. To my ear, in this case, the Solid Studio sound a little bit better because I prefer this openness in the high frequencies that the Solid Studio is providing me. Maybe the difference is due to the different AD conversion. But another element that can influence the sound is how Mooer and NUX have done the simulation of the power amp section. In this example, I was using for both of them a 6v6 valve simulation, and if I change the valve, the sound changes drastically. Let's try it, and let's move to an EL34 simulation. This is the radar. This is the Solid Studio. Radar again. So as you may have noticed, the sounds now change drastically and the differences are much more pronounced. In fact, In this case, in the radar, the bass frequencies are much more pronounced than the one in the Solid Studio. So it really depends on the power amp simulation. The difference is all there, in my opinion. So now let's try a different experiment. We are comparing the two units, but with the power amp disengaged. So with that, we can compare just the sound of the cab simulation without the power amps. Now I'm not using anymore the V4, the Countess, but I'm using the Revival Drive because, in my opinion, it can be used even without a power amp simulation. So this is the radar. And this is the Solid Studio. Radar. Solid Studio. Radar. Solid Studio. Radar. So the sound of the two units is very similar. So in conclusion, in my opinion, what differentiates these units from each other is the power amp simulation section. As regards the cabinet simulation, in my opinion, they are very similar. I can suggest both of them, while if we compare the power amp simulation, in my opinion, the Solid Studio is a little bit better. The latency is not an issue for both of them, even though the Solid Studio technically has less latency. The latency of the Solid Studio is 0.7 millisecond, while in the radar is less than 2 milliseconds. Both really don't suffer from latency issue. So thank you very much for following me in this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did it, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification button. It would be of a great help. See you in the next video. Bye bye.